Tuesday, there has been a large variety of reactions. There's been surprise, there's been shock, there's been incredulity, there's been anger, there's been worry, there's been fear. Folk have been annoyed at the standard of communication from the Council. Folk have been confused by some of the mixed messages coming from the media. People are anxious to understand more about what all this is about. People are scared about the possible risks to our health. And this is all perfectly understandable, and we share your views as a community board. This evening we want to present you with the facts surrounding this event and to give you the chance to ask questions. What's happened in the last few weeks and months is in the past. We've been told about it. The thing that cropped up yesterday about the 40, not 4, is highly unfortunate, and that will be clarified for you in just a little while. I think the way it came across in the media is not quite correct, so you will hear all about that very, very shortly. The important thing is where we go from here. Next week, there are going to be free blood tests for all the community. They'll be happening here in the event centre. It's very important that we get as many people done as possible, and then it's very important to get the results of these so that we know where we're at with all of this thing. It's very, very important that the councils both find out where this lead contamination has come from. And when they do find that out, it's very important they make decisions on what's going to be done about it. So these are the things that are going to happen from now on. We're going to find out what the health of you all is now. We're going to see what the story is with where the lead came from, and then we're going to decide what to do. What's happened in the past, who did what, who said what. A lot of it's unfortunate, it's not good, but I don't know there's any great thing to be gained from relitigating it all tonight. And I know you want to go and, crucify and lynch people for doing things, but there's no great benefit of that at all tonight. This evening we've got representatives from Public Health South. We've got Dr. Susan Jack. We've got she is the Director of Public Health South. We've got the medical toxicologist and Director of the National Poison Centre, Dr. Adam Pomerlow. And they're going to be here to answer questions. Susan Jack is going to be talking to you fairly shortly. We've also got the Chief Executive of the Southern DHB, Chris Fleming, and we've got Michael Butchert, also from the Southern DHB. From the City Council, and who is also a board member, we've got our local City Councillor, Dr. Jim O'Malley, who in real life is a scientist. He's qualified in biochemistry, physiology, and a few other unpronounceable things. He's quite a clever chap, and he understands all this kind of stuff. Also from the City Council, we've got Mr. Simon Drew, who's the General Manager of Infrastructure Services and Networks, and he's in charge of many different departments of the DCC, including the Three Waters Department. And Jim and Simon will speak about practical things to do with the network, including testing, what, where, why, who, when, and all the rest of that, so we get a good grip on that. We've got the Dunedin Mayor, Mr. Aaron Hawkins, here tonight, and you'll hear a little bit from him just fairly shortly. We've got a very important lady here. We've got Bridie Strang, who is the sign language interpreter, and we're most pleased to have Bridie with us. She can only be with us for about an hour and a half, so if you suddenly see her disappearing, it's not because she doesn't like you, she has other things to do. From the Otago Regional Council, we've got Council Chairman Andrew Noon, who's well known to all of you, and we've also got Richard Saunders, who is the General Manager of Regulatory Affairs. And Andrew and Richard will be available to answer questions relating to the river itself. This evening's meeting has been called by Public Health South, and they are having the meeting filmed for their records. So when the camera is looking at you, just make sure you do the hair, make sure you look your best. We're going to be on television, maybe. They're going to make this whole video available on their website, so the whole meeting will be filmed and available for you to look at from tomorrow. We're using 2 microphones this evening. With this large attendance, we want to make sure that everybody can hear what is happening. Contrary to what my wife would tell you, my hearing is fairly good, but it's not the same for all of you. And some people here are quite softly spoken. So when it comes to question time, Andy Barrett here will be walking around with a roving microphone And when you want to ask a question, just put your hand up. Andy will give you the microphone, and please just say who you are, where you're from, and then ask your question. And when you're using a microphone, please hold it up to your mouth as if you were licking an ice cream cone. It's no good way down here. Nobody can hear what you're saying. So please hold it up. And if you're speaking and you end up doing that, and you see me waving and doing that, it means we can't hear you. Please put the microphone higher up. Sonia Billiard is going to be taking notes this evening. And a very important part of what Sonia is doing is, in the event that we cannot give you a complete answer to any particular question, that will be noted, and then we will make the answer available to you in the coming days. There are sheets on the table over there where we would ask you, if you wish, to put your name, phone number, and email address so that we can keep in touch with you. Now, there are practical things like pipes and taps and water itself that we all have a reasonable idea about. But what we know very, very little about is the effects of lead on the human body. You would have picked up some leaflets as you came in, and Dr. Susan Jack will be enlarging upon all that fairly shortly. But just to get us started, I'm going to ask Mayor Aaron Hawkins, who would just like to say a few words of introduction to Jim O'Malley. We're going to have all the presentations first, and then it will be question time. Please do note that we've got the media present, we've got television, we've got radio, we've got the newspapers and all the rest of it. Aaron.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you to Public Health South for organising this meeting and giving us an opportunity to talk through some of the health issues, and thank you to Alistair and your colleagues on the community board, not just for this event, but for the leadership that you have shown your community over the past few days. It is invaluable, and we thank you for it. I appreciate that this is a distressing time, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend to understand what it feels like for you in this community at the moment. But I am here to say that we are committed to supporting this community through this and out onto the other side. And there's a strong showing of my elected colleagues here. I acknowledge Councillors Wiley and Raddick and Barker and Hall and Van der Vis, who I've seen in various parts of the building. And we're doing that through supplying alternative water in the short term, but mainly through focusing on getting to the bottom of the problem and fixing it, so that we are not in the situation where we're at risk of intermittent spikes, the likes of which we have seen. And we accept that some of our internal processes aren't up to scratch, and some of those have been fixed already, and others undoubtedly will be when there's a full and thorough review of this. Once we have this situation under control. The situation at the moment is, though, that the same people that we want to be doing that work, reviewing it, are the people we have on the ground trying to fix the problem. And this is primarily a public health discussion and a health discussion, but we thought it would be useful to be able to present some of the context, particularly with regard to the testing regime. And so Councillor Jim O'Malley, who's chair of our Infrastructure Services Committee, will be here shortly to talk through some of that in terms of how we got here. But thank you to all of you for coming along this evening, and thanks again, Alistair, for running the show. Kia ora.
The event happened on Tuesday afternoon. That's when we were told about it. It's now Friday. We've pulled this thing together in a fairly short space of time. It is unfortunate that we don't have a great big screen here or a data projector up in the sky. We have not had time to do that. There is a screen there is a data projector. Those of you who are in the front half of the hall will be able to see some of what's on there. But everything that's going to be there tonight will either be on the Dunedin City Council website or on the public health website. So they're all going to be available for you. So I'm going to ask Jim O'Malley now to come. I do beg, but we're going to. Dearie me. Chris Fleming, who's the Chief Executive of the District Health Board. You often see his picture in the paper. Chris would just like to say a few words. As I said, this has come together quite quickly, so we're making it up as we go along.
Kia ora koutou katoa, nā mai, haere mai. And look, thank you, Alistair, for the introductions. I'm Chris Fleming, I'm the Chief Executive of Southern District Health Board, and my role is to worry about the health and well-being of our community. And so your concerns are my concerns. And I think, Alistair, your comment about fear, concerns, anxiety and anger, absolutely, I get that, I understand it. And we need to work through those issues and the challenges. I do really reinforce your comment, Alistair, about at the moment, and in fact Mayor Hawkins, at the moment the key focus of mine is about making sure that my team is supporting you guys to understand any implications that this issue has had on you, and also that if there are implications, that I put the resources of my organisation behind my public health team to make sure that we tackle the issues promptly and with absolute vigour. I'm really delighted in my team. In fact, ironically, I looked at the audience and I said, if it wasn't for the work that you guys have done and our Medical Officer of Health, Susan Jack, we wouldn't actually be able to have an event like this. If we were in America or in England, Susan's led us from a public health perspective through the COVID aspect, and every piece of advice that she's given me has proven to be gold. And so I'm really delighted that she's leading the health response to this issue, and I'm here to listen to the questions that come up and listen to the concerns, and if there are health resources that are needed, you've got my assurance that I'll put them behind my team. So I appreciate you coming out, and thank you for the time, and make sure that you do ask the questions you need.
Thank you. Just a little thing, if you've got a mobile phone with you, could you either please turn it off or put it on silent, as I will with mine, because if mine goes off you will hear a very loud pipe band, which I'm sure you don't want to hear. Jim, do you want to come up here? There's the presenter there.
Alistair, the back still can't hear very well.
Pardon?
The back still can't hear very well.
Can you hear a wee bit better now if I speak a bit louder? Put your hand in the air if you can hear me. What's 2 plus 2? Great, you can hear me now.
Good evening, everyone. As Alistair has said in his introduction, my name is Jim O'Malley. I am the City Councillor attached to the Waikouaiti Coast Community Board, although I myself actually live in North East Valley. The reason I'm speaking tonight is, first because of my relationship with the Community Board, second because I am the chair of the Infrastructure and Services Committee, which is the committee that Three Waters sits under, but also it's rather unusual normally from someone in my position, from a governor's position, to be talking about something technical. And the reason that I'm speaking about it is my background in the pharmaceutical industry and academia, and around about data handling and how measurements are made and how we interpret it. Because while Alistair made the point that we need to move forward from where we are, I acknowledge to you and the community that you must be asking the question, how did we get here? There's a lot of stress that must be being felt when something like lead is turned up in the water. And I acknowledge that that is a terrible thing to hear, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about what we are seeing, when we saw it, and how we made the decisions to move to the point from first detecting a spike back in July to the no drink notice that was issued on Tuesday. After that, you're going to be angry at me because you won't be able to see what I'm going to say. And I also will say that for those of you who are in the back who can't see the screen, I left here at 10 o'clock last night after talking to a much smaller group at the One Coast meeting, and I'm more than willing to stay here till midnight or 1 o'clock tonight if that's what's needed in order to answer any questions that any of you have. On this very first slide is a picture of the catchment system and 6 graphs that I will walk you through, 1 graph at a time. The picture of the catchment system shows That's the intake and the reservoir where the water is treated. That's the line that goes to Karatani to a site next to the Karatani Bowls Club, where a water sample is taken that is basically looking at the Karatani status. There's another line that goes there, and pretty much just outside the road here, on Kildare Street, there's another sample site there, which takes in all of the water that goes into the main township, and then another site down at the golf course, which takes into account all the water delivered to the houses that come off Edinburgh Street. We have been taking a number of samples since July as part of a pipe management system activity. So the pipes in Edinburgh Street are cast iron and getting near end of age, and we're in the process of actually replacing them. In fact, you're going to start seeing that replacement work start very soon. A lot of the main pipes in the main township were replaced in the 90s. As part of that program, we were wanting to look at the integrity of the pipes as they sit right now, and so every week we were taking a measurement to look at the metals in the pipes. What we found on the very first measurement on the golf course site was an elevated level of lead, which was unexpected. But if we looked at all the other sites, and if you can read this eventually, if there's a sample taken that the analytical equipment looking at it couldn't detect it, it's called not detected, and there's an ND in there. So that means effectively zero. If you look at the site outside the Golden Fleece here, there was nothing detected there. There was nothing detected at Karatani. There was nothing detected at the reservoir. If we're looking at the left-hand side of this graph, or any of the three measurements we made at the reservoir. So we made 6 measurements that day. We saw a spike in lead at the golf course, but no evidence of lead anywhere else in the system. So I'm going to answer questions at the end of this, because otherwise I think we won't get through this. So the staff raised that up to their management, and it was reported to Southern District Health that we had seen this spike, but it was agreed that it was at this point anomalous because we couldn't see lead anywhere else. We kept going on with weekly sampling, and I'll go back to this graph because it's the most active. And the lead is slightly measurable in those lines because of the age of the pipes, and that's why they're up for replacement. But it is below the maximum acceptable value up until a reading in October, and then a very increased flushing regime was put in place, and the levels were kept low. But then we had an event that occurred on the 8th of December. Now at this point, no lead had been detected anywhere else in any of the other sites. But on the 8th of December, we had something really unusual happen. There was a very high lead level picked up at the golf course, nothing out here at the Golden Fleece, and a very high level picked up at Karatani at the Bowls Club, but nothing at the 3 reservoir sites, if you're about halfway across that time frame by that point. So what happened there was, again, now, there's something that you've seen in the media. This water sample was taken on the 8th, it was processed, and the results were sent back to the council on the 18th. Now there'd been no, except for that very first one on the golf club, there'd been no elevated lead measurements to speak of in the system, and this was part of a maintenance program. So the person responsible for opening and reading this email was on summer break. When he came back, he opened his emails up and then saw this number. As soon as he saw this number, he elevated. So this number, although taken on the 8th of December, didn't get elevated up to senior staff until mid-January. There are actual changes not only around internal processes, but actually new changes in the whole water standards, which will mean that even if a measuring company sees something like that, they will elevate it immediately. But I acknowledge that that was a good month between it was taken before senior staff or the staff in general were aware of that value. However, upon finding it and seeing no lead in the rest of our measurement systems, we elevated the status to watch closely, because there's something weird about this. The following week, it was all gone again. So it's an event where the lead is, where there's nothing, and then it goes bang, and then the next week it's gone. So we don't know how high that is or how wide that is, and I'll get into that in a bit of how we're going to make those assessments. So we put that on a high watch in January, and then this came up in the reservoir. So that on the right hand side of the reservoir, you'll see that in, I think about a week ago, because it actually elevated this, we detected lead in the reservoir for the first time. That's what initiated the do not drink, because we're at a point now saying we're seeing lead in different parts of the system on one sample, and then the next week it's not there again, and we're seeing it here but not there, then we're seeing it here but not there, and now we saw it in the reservoir. And when we saw it in the reservoir, didn't see it anywhere else. So what we think we're looking at is what might be best described as a pulse of heavy metals entering the system. And if that is what we're looking at, then what we would think we're going to see is that it's been drawn in from the river, and then it is being dispersed through the town. But because we actually have a fairly low supply rate for the towns, all that water gets through the pipes and out the other ends very quickly, so that this pulse is actually quite narrow in time, and that's why we're seeing it in some places and missing it in others. It also means that most of the time our water has always been fine, but we don't know, and there's a big don't know here, whether there's been other pulses, whether we've missed them or not. So we've gone to the point of saying it's just too unpredictable to declare this water safe to drink, so let's go to a no drink notice. Now, others are going to talk about the health implications of that, as I'm here to talk about how we made those measurements and how we got to this point. How do we move on is the next step, because you're going to wonder how, when, and how you're going to feel safe about drinking water again in this town. We feel that the first thing we need to do before we can move on to our next step is to identify one of these pulses when they occur again. So the water system is running, you're just not drinking it. And if a pulse occurs, we want to be able to pick it up and see what happens upon it entering the reservoir and then dispersing through the town. Before we start going up the river, we need to know for a fact that it has in fact entering from the river. We need to exclude everything else. But we are also starting to do work on the river itself. So what we've put in place is, on every one of those sampling sites we have now, we've shifted the sampling frequency from once a week to every day. And we're going to be putting on some of those sites, and I'd like to see potentially on all of those sites, things called auto samplers, which are basically taps that go on and off and sample every hour. So we'll be sampling the water on an hourly basis, putting those samples aside, sending away one sample for testing, and once we get evidence that there's been another pulse, we'll take all the samples that were taken around that time and have them tested, so we can get a sense of how big it is and how long it lasts for. And also, what we should see is that wherever it's come from will be where the highest concentration of this material was. So we are going to want to basically, we hope by doing that we'll be able to pinpoint the source. Because by able to pinpointing the source, then we'll be able to get onto the remediation component of it. Along with those sampling regimes, while it's not on this graph, we also saw elevations in copper and zinc as well, and iron. Now those conduct electricity, and so you can measure their presence by looking at the ability of the water to conduct electricity. We have one of those machines on the reservoir now, and actually it's been in operation for about at least 2 years, so we're now going back through the data set to see if not there's any evidence in that. The technicians in the water department are calibrating those machines to see if they can actually pick up heavy metals. So we might be able to get an understanding of what's happened in the past, because I know that one thing you're going to want to know is how often has this occurred. I want to say something here too. Under the current national drinking standards, the amount of time you're required to sample for heavy metals is very, very low. The only reason we were doing this was because we were doing the maintenance work, and otherwise we wouldn't have picked it up. Now, I'm actually just saying that either as an out or an apology or anything. That's just a matter of fact. Towns around the country do not test heavy metals on a high frequency rate. this is highlighted for us that we will, especially on this particular catchment, especially till we get to the point of identifying where this cause was, that level of frequency of testing is going to be too low. But I also don't think that we're going to, and we'll touch on that more, I can't see this order being re-lifted until we're absolutely 100% certain that those pulses will not go through the system again while you're drinking it. So we'll either have to be able to detect them and cut them off before they come in, but more importantly, what we're really wanting to do is go and find where they're coming from. So we want to get you back to drinkable water as quick as we can. We acknowledge and to some extent apologise about this, but to some extent we don't really know if we're actually the cause of it. So we're trying to get to the bottom of it. But we know that you are going to want to get your drinking water back as fast as possible, so we're working on that. And we'll take into other considerations as we move forward on how we could do that. If we get a pulse in the next few weeks, that'll help us a lot with this investigation. If we don't get one in the next couple of months, then I think we'll have to go on to something else, like how can we protect you if it does happen, or can we bring in the Mount Grand water through temporary connections and connect it back to the Kautani system. Currently the Mount Grand water, which is the main water supply for the city, goes as far as Seacliff, and there were plans to bring it through in the past. This will be something we'll be considering in the long term. I'm happy to answer questions later, and I know that you're going to have a lot of them. So I'm going to hand this on now to Susan, who's going to talk from Dr. Susan Jack, who's going to talk from the Southern District Health Board's position, and then I believe, and then Adam will talk as well. So, and then when that's over, then some really good questions.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Can you hear me at the back? Great. So thank you very much, Councillor O'Malley. That was really great and very clear to set out what the situation is. So as has been said, my name is Susan Jack. I'm a medical officer of health at our public health unit. Got my team with me here, Dr. Michael Butchard, who's also a medical officer of health, and Dr. Melissa Roy, who's a public health registrar, and we've been working with our team back in our office on this. Okay, so, very hard to see. That was introductions. Okay, so we're going to explain a little bit about lead. I'm not going to give you all the details about lead. I'm sure many of you have been Googling and finding that out for yourself. But lead is a heavy metal. We shouldn't have lead in our bodies. So our bodies biologically do not use lead for anything, and that's different to things like iron and copper, that we have some processes in our body that might actually use that. So in terms of a heavy metal, if we ingest it, it has no use in our body. It can lead to adverse health effects. And this is usually if people have had a chronic exposure, so an exposure, a continuous exposure over a long period of time. Because of the situation here with the intermittent spikes, we don't know if that has happened. We don't know if there's just been a spike, in the spikes in the last 6 months, or if it's been the previous years, because as has been explained, testing hasn't been done that regularly to understand that. So that is why we are wanting to move forward to understand what's going on. People in New Zealand are exposed to lead all the time. A lot of you older folk, I include myself in that, we were exposed to lead in petrol. We've been exposed to lead in paint. Systems and regulations have changed, but older people, when you were young, your blood lead levels would be a lot higher than what young people experience today, and most of you have turned out mighty fine by the looks of things. So lead is not uncommon in New Zealand. There are some research studies where we can get an expected level of lead. So I'm just explaining that, so when we talk about when we do the blood levels, it will not be unexpected if some people have lead detected in their blood. Okay, so we've got paint through lead through things like paint and petrol, but also people through their hobbies. So if they're fishing and they use lead weights, or if they do lead lighting, if they go to rifle ranges and do shooting, all those kind of hobbies can also expose people to lead. So when you do come and have your blood test, there will be a short questionnaire, because we need to figure out if your blood level is elevated, is that due to the water, or is it because of your occupation, or because of your hobbies? So that's going to be a really important part of what we do going forward. So who is most at risk? And it is our young babies and children and pregnant women. We all absorb lead in a slightly different way, depending on our age, our body size, our nutritional status, our diet, can all have an impact. Some people may be affected much more harshly than others, even with the same exposure of lead. So it's not just a simple, we're exposed to this much lead and then everybody is going to have the same outcome from that. Okay, so what are the health impacts? A lot of people have been concerned about that spike in the one that Councillor O'Malley showed us. Acute spikes like that, obviously any lead intake is not good, but we have done some calculations and had support from environmental science and research, and worked out that if a child consumed a cup of water with water that had had a spiked level, they would have only had an elevation in their blood level 1/10 of what the notifiable level is. So lead is a notifiable disease. If you had lead poisoning, you went to your GP, they did a blood test, and it came back at a certain level, that would be notified to the public health unit, and we would be calling you and investigating to see what your exposures were. So that's set at a certain level, and it's not very high. So what I'm saying is, if a child had consumed a cup of water during that day when the high spike happened at the golf club, it still would have only been 1/10 of that level of notifiable, and well below what we've seen the maximum acceptable value. So that's just to provide a little bit of reassurance. Of course, the thing is, we don't know what's happened chronically, so we don't know over time have there been lots of spikes like that. And lead does accumulate in your body, so that's what we're trying to discover. So what are some of the symptoms? A lot of them are extremely non-specific. So tiredness and headaches, maybe muscle aches or feeling muscle weakness, some other neurological impact. For some people it may affect kidneys, it may cause an increase in blood pressure. But remember, this is chronic, consistent exposure with a lead level that might have that kind of impact. For children, often there are no symptoms at all that you can see, no physical symptoms. Acute lead poisoning, you might get things like severe abdominal pain and vomiting, and children would be unwell. That would happen in the day or two after they have consumed or had exposure to a high lead level. It's not going to be an ongoing thing. The thing with children that we are concerned about is the impact on development, and that chronic lead exposure can lead to issues with a child's development, and that's why we are moving forward with doing the blood test, so we can find out exactly what status we have. Okay, so Councillor O'Malley has already been through this with, you can see that, yeah. So we've got at the end of the reticulation systems, the golf club and the bowling club, and the site that is just across the road from here. So I'm not going to go into any more detail there. Okay, so this is just a summary of what we know that I can't actually read from here. So we've had the intermittent spikes. We don't have evidence of high levels very often, but as has been mentioned, because because the testing wasn't done on a daily. Yeah, I can't read even the laptop. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Thank you. So we've had these intermittent spikes in the two locations, the golf club and the bowling club. And then, like has been said, the result that came from the reservoir was reported to us on Monday. We looked at it and we put the picture together. We'd had these intermittent spikes at two other locations, never before in the reservoir. And at that point we said we've got to stop the drinking water until we can figure out collectively with DCC what is going on. So we were informed about that result on Monday. We had meetings with DCC, and by Tuesday that stop drinking your water notice went out to you. And now we're Friday having this meeting so that we can hear your concerns, but also so that you can hear from us the situation as has been explained and what we're going to be doing moving forward in terms of assessing what the health risk has been. Okay, so only ever been that one elevated result at the reservoir, and actually that one at the reservoir was before treatment. After the water treatment had gone through on that same day, the subsequent result was back down to below the acceptable levels. Most spikes were not at a level that would cause acute toxicity. That one spike, as I've mentioned and described to you, even at that high level, and I know 40 times above the maximum acceptable level does sound very scary, but they make those maximum acceptable levels actually very low so that you can go many times above them before there would be toxicity. That's just to explain that. And as I said, we have consulted with environmental science and research and other experts to say that from that one spike, the risk of having a toxic effect is very slim. However, because we don't know what has happened previously, that's why we're moving on to the next thing. So we're taking a very cautious approach. We've asked you to stop drinking the water, stop using it to prepare your food. We have said you can continue to use it for showering and bathing. Lead is not absorbed through the skin, so as long as you're not drinking the water while you're having a shower, you should be fine. And you can still use it for washing clothes, washing dishes, and so forth. Then the next big thing that we're going to be doing is trying to help determine if there has in fact been chronic exposure. And so that's why we're inviting all of you to come back next week and participate to have your blood taken. It's only a small amount. So for a child or a baby, we can do it on a heel prick, which is a little jab in their heel, and we just need a few drops of blood. For adults, it's going to be less than half a teaspoon that we need to be able to do your lead level. And then once we have all those results, so the turnaround time for the test results will be 2 to 3 days. We have worked very closely with WellSouth, and WellSouth, the primary healthcare organisation, will be helping to roll this out with us next week. They have set up an 0800 number that you can call to get your results, and we'll be providing that information. We do ask you not to start calling 24 hours later, because chances are we won't have it, and we'll work out with the lab exactly when it would be good for you to start calling for those results. We'll have people who will be staffing those phones who can give you the information that you need. So those will be for your individual results, but then what we will be doing is working with environmental science and research, collating all the results together, and then we will hold another meeting to give you the collective results. Obviously, for privacy reasons, we're not going to be talking about individuals, but we will be able to give you the range of results, the average, and hopefully disaggregate that by age and gender and so forth. So that will be a further public meeting probably in a couple of weeks' time. If people can come and get their bloods checked and then give us a few days to get those results and to do that analysis that needs to be done, put it all together, and then we'll hold another meeting where we can present those results back to you. So the testing will be available at this venue from next week. On Tuesday afternoon we're going to start at 2 o'clock, so 2 till 5 p.m. Wednesday the 10th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we are asking in particular that families with young children come on those first 2 days, please. Older people, adults, if you can wait. Thursday and Friday we will be having late afternoon, early evening clinics from 3 p.m. till 7 p.m. So if you have young children, or if you communicate with your friends, families with young children, if they can please come on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then everybody else can come on the other days. That would really help with us with our logistics. We have a team of people who are going to be taking blood. We'll have people experienced in taking blood on young babies and children. So, of course, there will be the slight pinprick pain of having a blood test, but we do hope that as many of you as possible will avail yourselves of this opportunity to have your blood lead levels checked. Testing is free. And big thanks to the Ministry of Health, who've been very supportive of us in all of this and are supporting us financially to be able to roll this out to you and the community. Testing will also be free if you do choose to go to your GP. We are still working out a mechanism. I know that some of you have already been to your GP. We are going to work out a way to reimburse you for that GP cost, if there was one. And work out a way that if people want to go to your GP, and that's absolutely fine to do, you can do it through that route, and that will also be funded. Like I said, we prefer if the children can come on those first 2 clinics. If that's absolutely impossible for you to make it, then please still come along for the other clinics. And then results will be available in 2 to 3 days, and the 0800 number is there, but we will make sure that that's on both the DCC website and the Southern Health website. Okay, so I'm going to finish then here, and I'm going to invite Dr. Adam Pomelo just to come and give a few remarks, and then what we'd like to do is open it for questions. Okay, and we'd like to ask if the first lot of questions, please, can be health related, and then we'll open it up wider if you've got questions for DCC or about the water system.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everybody. So my name is Adam Pomerlo, and I'm the director of the National Poison Center. I'll just explain real quickly that I'm a medical doctor that specializes in... Is this better? All right, so you start from the top. My name is Adam Pomerlo. I'm the director of the National Poison Center. I'm a medical toxicologist. What that is, it's a medical doctor that specializes in poisonings and exposures. And so we help provide advice to individuals when they need that, or to their doctors if they need help assessing situations like this, whether it's a lead exposure or any sort of exposure that can cause harm. Now, one of the key things I'd like to get to the questions, because I think that'll be, everyone's probably itching to ask questions, but just a few basic points to emphasize from what Dr. Jack said. First off, lead exposure is ubiquitous. The last time there was any sort of biomonitoring study where blood lead levels were checked in asymptomatic people in New Zealand was done by the Center for Public Health Research from Massey University. That was a study that was done between 2014 and 2016. They tested 300 adults and about 200 children as young as age 5. Every person had a detectable blood lead level in the study. There's always a background, and blood lead levels are very important for determining individual risks and health consequences. Now, from my standpoint as a toxicologist, typically we are going to be more involved when people have acute lead poisoning. Now, when it comes to lead, There's a ton of science, which is great. There's a lot of knowledge, but when you're doing some searching, it can be overwhelming to find all the things that lead is associated with. So hopefully my role here can be to provide some insight and some reassurance about what we know and what we hope to do with the blood lead levels once those are available. And then also lastly, with the testing that's going to be offered, that's where all of the kind of risk assessment and important decisions are going to be made. The intervention for most blood lead that's detectable is to prevent further exposure from happening. So I agree with the approach that Public Health South has taken and the interventions that they've done to date for protective actions. And I think that they've been very proactive in that approach with the recommendations they've been giving, and that would be the recommendations I would be giving if people were coming to me directly for the same information. With that, I think I'd like to get to the questions to answer as much as we can.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Adam. What we're going to do just now is get these tables and chairs up the top here so that you can see everybody who's going to be answering the questions. So we might ask some of our fitter people just to come along and whack it up there. There was that case yesterday of the 4004, and that appears to have been an arithmetic misinterpretation. The maximum allowable level was 10 micrograms per litre of water. The reading was 0.39 milligrams. So a microgram is 1,000th of a milligram is 1,000th of a gram. So the reading wasn't 39 times higher, it was 390 times higher. And it was one spike, and it was right down the end of Edinburgh Road. It was highly unfortunate that it was misreported, but it happened, and we can't undo it. And it caused a huge amount of alarm, not just here, but throughout the country, and the Prime Minister's even onto this. So it happened, and that's going to be part of the review that the City Council will be taking. So we're going to have Susan and Adam, we're going to have Jim O'Malley, the Silver Ghost that's coming up there, Simon Brew, he's going to be there, and we're going to invite Andrew Noon and Richard Saunders from the Regional Council to come up, and they will be there to answer any questions that come up to do with the river itself. Now Andy Barrett here is going to take this microphone around, so please, when you hold this one, do hold it fairly close so we can hear you. There's going to be a lot of you wanting to ask questions. We appreciate that, we're looking forward to it. So Andy's going to be the spotter, and I might spot some as well. So just remember, hand up, say who you are, where you're from, and ask your question, and then the appropriate person here will answer.
Lucky first. Mike Perkins, Waikouaiti. I'd like to ask, is a good household filter effective or not for lead?
Can you hear me? It would depend on the filter, but very unlikely.
Hang on, we can't hear you.
I had a guy from Lawrence come today about my water filter, and he said that my filter that I have in my whatever is 85% against lead, and there are some in the community that is installed that.
Hold the mic up, please.
So even though he told me that, I'm still not going to use my water filter because 85% isn't the best result, I don't think.
Over there, Andy. Andy's going to be doing about 10 miles tonight.
Why don't you line people up and walk to sleep?
The person I got my water filter off said that there's a special one, it's very expensive. I think it's got silver in it or something that will extract the lead, but your ordinary household filter won't. Now I want to know is, does our body get rid of the lead, and what is an acceptable level? And will the levels in our body go down and so give us a false result next week?
So if I can just please reiterate the question. So one was, will the levels go down if you have a level in your body? And what was the first part of the question?
Was, does our body get rid of lead? And what is an acceptable level of lead in our bodies? Or should it be none?
Right. So in the body, we prefer if no lead were present, okay? However, we all have some lead present in our body from what we call kind of background exposures. Lead's present in water, it's present in food, it's present in paint, it's present in soil. So that's why we're always going to have some degree of lead in all of our bodies. An acceptable level would be 0 theoretically, but that doesn't exist for anyone. So it's more about what consequences are going to occur as a result of the lead that is in our bodies. Lead is what's called a cumulative toxin. The more lead that builds up in your body over time, the more likely you are to have health effects. Now, at the levels that we see in routine testing in the New Zealand population, the levels are present, but they're so low that they won't cause any symptoms that are easily measurable. If you're talking about acceptable in the terms of what level will cause symptoms, that's going to be much, much higher than the levels that are common in the New Zealand population. But I can tell you that through my experience at the Poison Center, there are cases every year of people developing some symptoms because they have lead exposure from various sources. And that's where public health units like Public Health South do an investigation to try to identify the source. It's very uncommon for drinking water to be the primary source causing high enough levels that people become overtly symptomatic.
The part of the question was, can your body excrete it?
Yes. So that's the second question. Can your body excrete? Yes. Lead just happens to be stored mainly in bone and teeth in the body. So the way that it gets in, it goes through your gut to your bloodstream and then to all the different tissues in your body. Primarily, it's stored in bone and in teeth. And because of that, it actually has a very long elimination time from the body. Some estimates are decades that it would take, if you had no further lead exposure, it would take up to decades to get rid of the amount that's there. This is why everyone has some degree of lead present when you measure it. But yes, it would go down theoretically if you could stop all exposure from happening. However, that's not a very likely scenario because of the background incidence of this metal being present everywhere. So we aim to keep lead exposure as low as we can. That's why there are the standards about maximum allowable values in drinking water and other public health interventions like that.
Hi, my name is Ashley. My question is chronic lead exposure detectable in a fetus? How is it detected, and can it be treated in utero?
Thank you, Ashley, for the question. That's a really good one. So a lot of the studies that are done, when you read about lead, one of the first things that pops up is that it's a neurotoxin. It affects development. And that's true. The studies, the way they're usually done is if you have a population of people and you test their blood lead at the time of birth, because a newborn baby's blood lead at birth is going to be very similar to what mom's blood lead is going to be, okay? Because lead will cross the placenta. If you then follow those children over time, and this is what a lot of studies have done and where this evidence comes from, if you test their IQ scores at age 7, let's say, that might be one of the designs, you will find that there's a relationship, an association between higher blood leads with a slight decrease in the scores on these IQ tests. And that the range of effect, the size of that difference, varies with the study. but it is pretty consistent in the studies that have been done with different sorts of IQ tests in different populations in different places around the world, that there's a relationship between the higher the lead and having a somewhat lower IQ score. Now that might be as small as less than 1 point. Some of the decrements are a fraction of a point. So instead of having an IQ at age 7 of 100, it might be 99. And even in the studies that have larger effect sizes, it's usually on the order of 3 or 4 IQ points based upon what I was looking at today. So that's where a lot of this evidence comes from. Yes, it does affect neurodevelopment. Another association that's common is attention deficit type issues, so attention and other neurocognitive abilities. And so aggression is something that's been sort of linked in studies, that they try to, these associations are made. But it's really hard to move from that to, for an individual, what's my risk of, what am I going to be like in 7 years down the road? That sort of measurement that's a much harder thing to really pinpoint, because we're studying populations in these studies, not necessarily an individual.
Ralph Adler, I live in Karatani. What I find particularly disturbing is that the information we're receiving seems to be changing by the moment. Today was the first time I heard July being the initial date of detection. The first day we heard it was, the first time the news reported it was January. Then there were rumors that maybe it was December. And then we heard August. Concentration levels are changing too. So what happens is, I think many of us lack trust in what is being said to us. And on top of that, there's a sense that is there competence? Are we being led by competent people? So my question to you is, are there further facts that are going to drip out over the next few days about when the detection was first discovered? And are there other concentration issues that we're going to hear about too, that maybe it isn't 10 times or 100 times, it's some other number?
All the numbers that you heard were released at the start, so we actually acknowledged those right at the very start. The statement about 39 versus 300 micrograms was, if you go and look at the Radio New Zealand interview, it was a staff member who was being absolutely hammered by the interviewer and had to come up with a number straight away. And he made a mistake in an interview without the paper in front of him. That is not the same as deliberately releasing the wrong number. And I take actual offence at that, because we have been as transparent as possible. If you have not heard that number, it is because you've read a report coming third hand. We have never ever held back the data. And the data is now out on the website to be looked at. If you want to call me a liar, you can call me a liar, but you will not find... Listen, it's about whether or not the question was, did we disclose the data? We disclosed the data straight away. That's it.
There also was some confusion because some of the samples were taken, for example, in July, but then reported in August. And so there has been some confusion in the media where there was only one sample actually taken in July, but then reported in August. So you may have heard it reported as the August one or the July one and so forth. So that unfortunately has added to the confusion, because there is quite a long turnaround time for the water levels of lead to be reported back to the council.
Thank you all for such clear explanations. I'm Ruth Ferguson, I'm from Waikouaiti. I want to ask a question really about the testing procedures for this, because they've identified lead, they've identified other heavy metals such as copper, zinc and iron. The Ministry of Health and their drinking water standards have 25 inorganic substances that they identify as being at risk. I would like to know if it was such a general screening method that you would have picked up these other substances, or was it looking specifically for particular metal ions?
So the study that predicated finding lead in the water was a study looking at the corrosivity of the water and the impact that it has on pipes. So we are renewing pipes in the Waikouaiti and Karatani areas, and so that was to inform our investment decisions about which pipes needed to be replaced and when. So we weren't testing for wider inorganic contaminants. It was predominantly to do with alkalinity and the corrosivity of water.
Do you plan to look for this? Because I would have concern about arsenates, I would have concern about cadmium. It might help you also identify the source.
Yeah, correctly. So we are testing a much wider suite of contaminants now, and that's daily. Just, I guess, to some reassurance, the way that we manage the water scheme, there is a water safety plan that looks at what some of the risks in the catchment and the network might be and what things we might need to test for. And so where there is risk, those contaminants are tested for, and where it is not considered a high risk, then they're not tested for or not tested for frequently, such as lead.
My name is David from Karatani. I have 2 points. One, I find it hard to believe that over the last 5 or 10 years, studies of the analysis of the water have not been done. And why is it we're only looking back 6 months? The second point is, as someone who studied hydrology at university, have you correlated rainfall with the contaminants and the spikes?
Three questions there. So the rainfall correlation, we haven't been able to see a correlation between rainfall and contamination. The testing that look back will be much longer than 6 months. I think at this point in time we've looked back 2 years, but the more data we get, the bigger the files are and the slower it is to look at it. So we're looking back 2 years at this point in time. And as we work with Public Health South, that might go back longer. Sorry, did I answer your questions?
Have you looked at rainfall against these spikes?
Yes, we have looked at the rainfall against the spikes, and we can see no direct correlation.
I will get to everybody, don't worry.
Hi, Gerard from Merton. I saw had access to the graphs today, and the spikes correlated with 3 to 4 days after we had rainfall events at our place.
Sorry, one of them or all of them?
All of them.
That's not. So I have a team of things looking at it, and I've been briefed that they haven't been able to find a direct correlation between those results. But I will follow that up.
Hi, Chelsea Morrison. I'm up Aberdeen Street and I have young children, so I'm really concerned, and I have a great care for our young children around here, so I just wanted to make you guys know that we are really, really worried. But my biggest question, as a geologist and a scientist myself, how do you know that you've got fair and representative sampling? And it really doesn't seem like a very large number of samples or a very big frequency of sampling to me. It's like taking 3 samples and deciding I have a gold mine.
Yeah, correct. So at the moment where the sampling was in excess of the drinking water standards already, and then so that sampling is being ramped up even further to daily sampling. Councillor O'Malley talked about composite sampling, so that is taking a sample every hour, and what we would do then is just take say the 11 o'clock sample tested. If that demonstrated lead, then we'd go back and look at the rest of the day, and we're also trying to correlate. So to get a online lead testing meter is problematic. They're hard to calibrate. So we are looking into online lead testing. Largely they come from overseas, so it won't be a quick thing. So in the meantime, we're doing the sampling with the lab that we can and trying to work out options for using such as a conductivity meter that Councillor mentioned before, to create a correlation that might tell us that lead's in the water or not.
But how do you know those samples are representative?
We don't, because we don't have online monitoring yet.
You're working on the principle that if you're sampling across the system and you know the flow of the water through the system, and if it's coming in from the river, which is the starting hypothesis, that we will be taking things on the path of where we believe it would go with a high enough frequency that even if it's got a very narrow time frame, we should be able to detect it. We will keep assessing that. You are completely correct. It's completely dependent on how often you sample and that you are sure that you are doing the best spatial distribution so that you can follow something through the system as it goes through the system. I completely agree with everything you're saying. I'm more than happy to sit and talk after this with you in greater detail.
Richard Olsen, Waikouaiti. I became a dad a week ago and I'm absolutely terrified. Can you talk to me about the results of breastfeeding with that? And another thing, Hawkins is over there. Why aren't you up there and why aren't you showing some leadership? Because you've shown none this whole time.
Come on, Hawkins, be a man. I just going to ask why as the leader of our city and head of senior management at the DCC, who should be monitoring different departments, why is our mayor not standing up there? Why is he hiding down there?
We'll first answer the question from the gentleman in the front.
So your question was in regard to breastfeeding? Specifically, is it whether it should continue or if there's particular cautions around it? Yeah. So generally in situations where the water level is up, the advice is to continue breastfeeding because of all the benefits that it confers normally to the baby. It would depend on the serum level of the mother potentially. And so that's something that we'll have to look into further. And so that's why blood lead levels are going to be important for individual sort of guidance on that sort of thing. I think that given the situation of what we know is the baseline of New Zealand population being rather low, and the expected, we'll have to wait and see what the actual results come back at. The expected increase in blood lead, the expected addition to what everyone's sort of background lead exposures are from the data that we have so far suggest that it would be mild increases where it shouldn't be a risk, but until we have further data, it's going to be hard to give real specific advice, and so we'd have to do more assessment of that.
My name's Jennifer. I have a crib down Thomas Street. Just wondering, a lot of people fish the river. Do the fish take in lead and should we be eating it?
I'll comment on at least one piece of that. I am certainly no expert in monitoring food, but lead is present in other animals as well. And so shellfish can be in other sorts of fish. I'm particularly sensitive about shellfish because the study I referred to earlier, the last check in New Zealand, they found that in the sample that they did, people that said they had a high shellfish diet were more likely to have a little bit higher blood lead level. So there is, dietary sources are definitely a potential source of lead. But again, it would depend upon what the concentration is in fish, and I'm not familiar whether there's any, what the regulatory thresholds are for that sort of exposure.
Good afternoon. My name's Clyde Double A and I'm a resident here of Waikouaiti. I'm putting the question to the DCC. There are a lot of employers in the room. Can I have a hand up? Employers? No employers in the room. Okay. Has the DCC notified WorkSafe under Section 24 and 25 of this issue, for this issue? Because I'm concerned that there's an internal review going on which might not get to the bottom of this. I want an external investigation into the conduct of the DCC. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Alex McAlpine, local, also like some of the others here. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I can't specifically respond to the WorkSafe issue, and someone can. Potentially down there, but I think for the community to have any confidence in any review of what has happened up until this point, it would need to be done independently and externally of council. I don't see how we could turn up reviewing our own work and then present that back to the community.
Is that a promise?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, so I'm not aware that we've notified WorkSafe yet. I guess the focus for the team has been community safety and making sure that we had adequate safe drinking water for you and trying to get the data out into the community so we understood what was happening. But I'll follow that up and make sure that we do.
Sorry about the false start. Alex McAlpine, like some of the others here, I'm a local, but I'm also a geoscientist of standing. I was a little bit concerned on one of the points about, I think Jim made it, we'll look at the system first. In other words, everything that's in the pipes. Most of you drink your water from a pipe that comes through the storage system. And then look at the river afterwards. It seems to me that it was the lead in the river that really triggered the alarm, as it did for me. If there's lead in the river, I guess I'll make a couple of observations as far as I can see. Firstly, it's an ORC, largely an ORC regional council issue. We haven't heard from them. I don't know what their state of preparedness is. I don't know whether they have notified, or anyone's notified, the people that take their water from the river above the water treatment plant for their own households, the few farmers that are up there, and importantly for their stock and crops, because lead can also obviously get into the human food cycle through stock. And in fact, it might be that looking at the condition of the health of the stock, which are cattle particularly very susceptible to lead poisoning, might give you a better indication of whether there is actually a chronic lead problem in the river, and also where its source might be. So I'm very concerned and disappointed with what I've seen in terms of setup with the regional council. As far as I can see, it's just monitoring of turbidity and nitrates and the usual things in the river, and it's actually Macrae's Mining who have got one site only which monitors lead. So I'm very concerned with the river. If there's lead in the river, I would commend it to be deemed an emergency, and you need to get a multi-disciplined group together to look into that potential emergency. I think you should also seek an assurance, a statement of assurance from Macrae's, because they have, in the last month or so, in the last 6 months or 9 months, done considerable development right at the head of the catchwater for the Waikouaiti. I don't make that as a judgment on Macrae's, but it is certainly something that I would have thought the Otago Regional Council would be assuring us on.
Thanks, Alex. I have to say this was not a DCC presentation about what we were doing, and I missed at the end of the presentation that we're not confining it just to the water reticulation system, that we're going to be looking at the river upstream of the intakes and in the sediments in that area, looking for whether there's chronic heavy metal exposure in the river. And I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, because I know that the ORC is also starting their studies on the river itself, and we are forming a joint task force.
Have you notified the people that take the drink water?
At a moment I'll hand. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Hey, I'm going to hand it to Richard in a moment, but hey, I just want to reassure you from the Otago Regional Council's point of view that we're working as closely as possible with the DCC, and we'll continue, and we'll take our collaboration to a new level because of this serious issue that we're confronted with. So as sympathies go out to both the Waikouaiti and Karitani communities, we sense your frustration, and like I say, we will work as close as we can with the DCC. And I think the other point too, I just feel that we need to stick together as a community with this sort of issue, and like Alistair said at the front end of this meeting, let's not look back. We need to move forward, and we need to deal with what we've got in front of us, and we also need to look out for our neighbours and work together as a community. I just really want to emphasise that, okay? So I'll just ask Richard to cover off what the ORC's investigation involves.
Evening, everybody. So I'll try and cover those off in order. Look, I'm not aware of direct notification upstream of others that are either on permitted takes or consented takes, so I'll have to check in with the team on that one. We're ORC, you're absolutely right, are responsible for the monitoring of water at source, which is the river water, so that is our responsibility. And we do state of the environment monitoring for a number of those measures that you've highlighted. Heavy metals are not normally included in state of the environment monitoring, so we don't monitor for things like lead on a regular basis. We would do it in situations like this, where additional testing or a revamped testing regime is implemented where there is a specific issue as we have at the moment. So since the notification from DCC about the high test in the raw water reservoir on Tuesday, the team have gone out to take specific samples for testing for lead in the river water, upstream and downstream of the intake, to see whether, and we're expecting those results back next week. Early next week there'll be sampling of the sediment upstream and downstream, and the team are just designing up that test to undertake that early next week as well. So that will give us some early samples. We'll then work with DCC to establish a sampling regime that supports the system testing. So the two sets of testing will work together to give some results to help inform everybody what the actual issue is here. On Macraes, you're right, there are a number of consents for Macraes mine, and there is a specific consent dealing with the upper Waikouaiti River. We have a significant compliance program with Macraes, and they have a number of consent conditions that involve independent testing of discharges from Macraes into the river, and they provide those samples to our ORC in accordance with that consent. So all of the test results we've received from Macraes do demonstrate compliance with their consent conditions and levels of lead well under the acceptable drinking water. So we continue to follow up with them. They are a very interested party, obviously, and concerned about any potential effects on the river, and have been more than willing to share their data and information with us, both in terms of their sampling and compliance with consents, but also the knowledge they hold around the geology and other factors that may influence the testing.
Good evening, Karen Leeming, and we live in Kildare Street. We grow our own vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and store them for the winter to feed our family. Are they going to be no good and we've got to throw them away? We've also got fruit trees that are laden with fruit. Is that going to be contaminated because we've used the water to keep them alive and keep them growing? I'm just so scared to even eat anything out of my own garden now. I mean, I'm trying to harvest my potatoes at the moment, which I've done every year since we've been here. and put them in boxes so that we've got potatoes to last us pretty much all year. In the last 4 years, we've only had to buy 10 kgs of potatoes per year. I like to squirrel my food away. I've had hard times before, and I try not to have hard times anymore. And I try to provide food for not just my husband and I, but for friends and neighbours, and also my family who live here in Waikouaiti and in Dunedin. Thank you.
So we have put some thought into this, and it is difficult to know how much lead is taken up by vegetables. One of the things that you know that we're doing is offering testing to the community. Now, the results of that testing will give us some indication of how long the problem has been going for and how big the problem has been. If the results come back from the community and say the average lead in the population is similar to other areas, then that would be evidence to not to be worried about fruit and vegetables grown on your property.
So don't eat them yet, but maybe in 6 weeks?
Well, what I would do, I grow veggies not here but in my home in Dunedin, I would not be eating them until I saw the results back from the community testing if this thing happened in Dunedin.
So you're going to come and take some things out of our garden?
So sorry, that by testing results I'm referring to the blood lead levels, so we're asking as many of you to please come forward. From
You're in the Green Party, you put me on TV. Why are the water levels, our toxicity levels in New Zealand, right, double that allowed of the rest of the westernised world? The drinking standard of water, not just in Waikouaiti, but in New Zealand as a whole, is not good enough. You talk about building new houses, development, the infrastructure is collapsing. What are you going to do, another 10,000 houses at Monskill? Next time South Dunedin floods, it's going to flood with shit. It's not going to flood with water.
Fair enough.
Yeah, good evening, Roger Hall from Waikouaiti. I'd just like to reiterate what the previous lady spoke about, my concerns, and I hear what all you people are saying. I'm not convinced that you've actually swung the audience over here tonight at all. We're pretty bloody angry about the whole situation, but what I do want, again, a reiteration from you people is what in fact does happen to us retired people who have a very large veggie garden. We process the garden for all sorts of reasons and we put the produce down. That's an ethos that our Green Mayor should understand fully well, and it seems to me that maybe this question really hasn't been covered as well as it should be. Again, I'd like your comments in relation to watering of veggies in the garden.
Okay, thank you for that. So like Michael said, we're not experts in vegetables or the absorption of lead from water into vegetables, but our advice would be, please come along and everybody get tested. In a couple of weeks we will have the results, and then you can make a decision about whether you want to eat the vegetables. We are, I guess, asking you for the next couple of weeks, hold off harvesting. Okay, well, you're asking for what our advice is. So our public health advice is, if it is possible for you to hold off eating your vegetables for a couple of weeks until we get the results. If the results will come back and they're within the expected range, as has been explained, we expect that there will be people with lead levels in their blood, but not unexpectedly high, then we can provide that assurance that your vegetables should be safe, because the water has not had that contamination causing enough to have chronic lead elevated levels in your blood.
Hi, Jane Schofield of Karitani. I'd like it to be noted that Karitani is quite different to Waikouaiti. I like the notion that the spikes in the water is flushed out at the other end, but unlike Waikouaiti, Karitani have heater tanks, and some of us have 5,000 litre tanks at home. Are they full of lead? What's going to happen with them? Can you guys come and test our tanks? I would like to know how much lead is sitting in my tank right now. Who's responsible for cleaning that out?
So we just don't know yet because we don't have enough data. So when we
I'm offering you data. Eurofins will come out and test all our tanks. Will you pay for it?
Yeah, so what Public Health South recommend at the moment is that you don't drink the water, you can still shower and use your washing machine.
The question is, the tanks that we have full of our leaded water, that I believe is probably higher because of the length of time that water has been feeding into our systems. It doesn't go from your system out my tap. It sits in a tank.
Potentially, but we just don't know. So what I would recommend is that when we get through this, we understand where the leads come from, we've got safe drinking water onto your tap again, that is the time to talk about cleaning tanks and making them safe for when the safe, clean drinking water comes through the system.
How about Karitani? Who would like your tanks tested? Let's all get together and we will present the council with the bill once it's done.
Hello, I'm Rose Stringer-Wright and I'm also from Karitani. Thank you for coming out to talk to us today. We needed some reassurance. I just want to know why we have to come to Waikouaiti for blood tests. We've got elderly that don't drive in Karitani. Why can't we have a clinic out there as well, please? It would make a big difference to us and for the people that live locally. We are all together in this, but we are two separate townships. So please think about that.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Graham from Karitani.
Just want to respond to the lady there talking about Karitani and elderly people not being able to get here for a test. Sonia Billiard here is our community worker. If you can let Sonia know if you're unable to come, we will provide transport for you.
Hi, I'm Graham from Karitani, and my real concern, along with the rest of the people here, is testing. Are we sure that we're drinking Dunedin water that's been tested for heavy metals now? Because the testing seems to be totally inadequate. And why aren't we blood testing people straight away now, and that's going to give you results? What about livestock up on the catchment? Are they being tested? Because this is going to show you that there might be lead contamination up there.
So livestock question, DCC staff have been in contact with MPI. The advice that we've received from MPI is that the exceedances, the level of lead and the short-term exposure doesn't pose a risk to livestock. That's the advice that we've had.
Thank you. I mean, I think the thing is at this point, we don't have enough information. We really need you all to come, have your blood testing done, and then we will be able to understand if we have a big problem or in fact if we don't have a problem. And if we find out that we do have a problem, then of course we will need to look further and working ORC and DCC and looking at livestock and so forth. But at this point today, we just simply don't have enough information to give you an answer for that, sorry.
Yes, my name's Nikki, and I wasn't going to speak because I'm too embarrassed, but now I'm angry. I have spoken to 3 vets because I'm an animal person, and the vet I spoke to was an equestrian specialist, a doctor, vet, and he said that on no circumstances would he give water to any horse or any dog in Waikouaiti.
I'm sorry, I just can't hear what the question is.
Well, one of you mentioned earlier about the piping just at Seacliff from Dunedin. Is that correct? Is that right? Did I hear that right? That the main from Dunedin is at Seacliff? That's correct. Yes? Is it a yes, or is it a nod, or is it a halfway between? What is it?
No, it goes to Seacliff. So Seacliff.
Right, so the water in Waikouaiti is shot. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. It tastes like mud.
Yep.
It's shit. So why the hell not fast track that? That was your third option you mentioned earlier. Hang on. That was your third option you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Why the hell not just scrap all that and start fast tracking that and get the fucking water here? We need it.
That is actively looked at right now, and if that becomes a vital option and that's what the community wants, then that's a good outcome.
That should be.
But do remember, I've had a complaint, there is a complaint already that we've gone and put the rates up 9.8%. That's all 3 water spends and all 3 waters improvements. And I would like to keep spending more on that, but it doesn't come at no expense. So we're more than happy to do it. But the reason it didn't get done last time was the community back then in 1990 didn't want it done. It did not get done for any other reason. So listen, the 10-year plan is being consulted on right now, and I said this last night, the best way to get that water extension done is to with a loud voice, and I'm hearing that loud voice tonight, say that you want that extension and that you want it put in, and then we'll value it and see what the cost of that is, and I would like to see it get done.
To do it. Anyway, I'd like to apologise for that swearing, but...
Yeah. Okay. No, listen, we're not up here to try to make your life worse. We're trying to do our best. We've come here with what we've got, with what knowledge we have of the situation right now, and we're trying to hear from you things that we can do. We're trying our best. Sorry.
Hi all, my name is Michelle Cox and I live in Waikouaiti. I've been growing organic food for my family for all of their lives. I've been teaching organic gardening to people who want to know that their food is safe. I've been doing that for 20 years. I feed from age 4, my youngest, to my mum, 91. I drop off greens for her. I don't think they're safe. Over the years, I've had to learn about lead in soil because we found a contaminated patch or 2 in our garden. They were well over MFE levels of 160 parts per million lead, 700, 800 parts per million. We have space to move, and we did move into clean ground. We spent a lot of money testing our soil. I want to know if you are geared up to test our soil if our blood tests come through in elevated levels in the next 2 weeks. I don't want to see a lag period. We grow awesome vegetables around here, okay? Who's growing vegetables at home? Yeah, we want to know if our soil is safe immediately if our blood levels are up. Also, Jane's question about the water tanks. Are you poised to test those tanks? You need to gear up and get ready to do that if our blood levels are high. And also, there's been talk of flushing out those tanks. And I expect that with the current level of understanding and lack of discussion about soil, that we're just going to biff this stuff onto Papatūānuku. We're going to forget about Mother Nature. Our soil is our health, along with our water. We'll kind of blame that perhaps. But we need to be geared up to test that tank water and talk about where is it going to be safe to flush that out to. I've had people, Facebook saying, oh, can we put it under a hedge? Kids play in soil. The lead builds up in our soil. If this has been a chronic issue in our water body, that lead is building up gradually in our soil as well. It is taken up in brassicas, okay, beautiful kale, cabbages, that family. Also, we have to take care when we take our vegetables up that we wash or peel vegetables if we can. My understanding is that fruit and nuts are safe to eat if you've been hosing the ground. I'd like a scientist to confirm that. We need that information. My background is in biology and environmental planning. I have an interest in this, but I'm not a toxicologist. So I'd like to know that you're poised to go to the next stage. Thank you.
Perhaps I can comment on that. I live in Waikouaiti and we are also on tank water and have been for a long time, as are the people in Warrington, and I fully understand your concerns, and I've done things to my water tank. I found all sorts of goodies in there in days gone by. I would ask you, hang fire till we get these tests done next week, get the results back. Susan has already said we're going to have another meeting here. We arranged to have these flashing signs put on the highway to advertise this meeting. Was that helpful? Good, it must have been, because we've got a lot of people here. So we are going to have another meeting once we've got these results through and we know what we're doing. Depending on what comes through, if the results come through and say there isn't a problem, fine. If the results come through and say there is a problem, then I would agree with you. And if I was in Karatani, I would be asking these guys to be able to test my tanks. So, as your community board, we will most certainly look after that whole aspect.
Hi, my name is Nikaya and I live on Thomas Street here. I wanted to follow up on a question earlier that was asked by a woman in the front. She asked about the time frame between blood testing and how much lead would actually be in our blood. My concern is that if this has been an ongoing problem, we don't know beyond 6 months. I don't believe, based on my research, that lead would still be stored in our blood. It would be in our bones, as the toxologist mentioned, in your teeth and in your bones. So it's my understanding that urine tests are the most accurate forms of testing, not for children, but for adults. And I'm just concerned with the time frame with blood tests, that this might not, we're basing so much on the results of these blood tests, but are they really going to answer the ultimate question? If this has been going on for many years, we might not actually see those results in the blood test.
So to first address the question about will the blood test reflect how long this has been going on and whether it's been a recurring issue in the water, that the blood test won't say specifically. The blood tests are a reflection of what is in that individual's body. Now, you're right that lead is mainly stored in bone, but it's going to exist in an equilibrium in the body, so it's moving in and out of bone, because bone, despite its appearance, is actually not a static organ. Bone does kind of adjust and modify and change, particularly in children who are building new bone, or also in people that might be losing bone. So postmenopausal women have higher bone turnover. Osteoporosis can turn that over, so it's not static. Blood lead, from a clinical point of view, is the test that we use to make clinical decisions. We don't use urine lead to make any sort of management decisions. All of the clinical decisions about what is the best treatment moving forward, whether specific treatments are indicated, are based on blood lead plus the clinical symptoms that a patient may or may not have.
Hi, my name is Klaas Zuidema and I live here in Waikouaiti. To me, the elephant in the room is McRae's mine, unless proven otherwise. They've been operating there for many years, and I wonder the testing that is done, who is conducting those tests, who is paying the guys testing them, and who sets the standard for it. And that should be done by an independent organization and not McRae's Mines. Unless proven otherwise, I think that is where I believe the culprit is.
Yeah, so as I said previously, the consents require the testing to be carried out and reported to ORC, so it's a function of the consent holder or Oceania Gold as the consent holder to engage a party, an independent party, a suitably qualified party to carry out those tests and report those results to ORC compliance staff, who review them against the levels set by those consents and ensure that there is compliance. So that is the way the resource consent is written. That is a standard approach nationwide for consents and consent compliance, and relies on independent laboratories to undertake those tests and report those results through councils. So that's been happening with those McRae's Mine consents. We've had a very close look at them this week, and we will continue to, and we'll continue to work with the mine. And they have been very open with us this week about carrying out that work.
But couldn't there be spikes in their tests like they have been with yours?
What about the egg farm? Do eggs take
There was a question about spikes in their testing. So we review the testing against a limit set in the consents, and as I said, there have been no instances of exceedances in the upper Waikouaiti River for those levels for lead.
Have you looked at it against this other one here? The other grapes, like the spikes that have come through here, have you looked at them together from the McRae's and the ones that have come through this water?
So we test against the limit set in the consent, not related to. They have, the scientists at ORC have looked at it, and the distance between McRae's and the intake and the levels that are well under those shown in the consents mean that we had no concerns based on the results that we've been receiving for those consents.
Excuse me, sorry if I may. My name's Gavin Lee, I'm the Environment Community Manager with McRae's. So as Richard mentioned...
Can you just wait?
So hello, my name's Gavin Lee, I'm the Environment and Community Manager at McRae's. As Richard's mentioned, we work really closely with the ORC. All of our samples are sent off to internationally... Sorry? Okay. Is that better? Okay, so all of our samples are sent off to accredited labs. The consent limit that Richard talks about is 2.5 parts per billion. The drinking water standard that we've heard today that were on those graphs is 10 parts per billion. As Richard mentioned, we haven't exceeded our that limit of 2.5 parts per million. In fact, we've never gone above 2 parts per million. Most of the time, we're less than 1 part per million. We monitor monthly in the Waikouaiti catchment downstream of the mine. Look, hello. There's the ore body associated with McRae's does not concentrate lead. So it concentrates gold, but it doesn't concentrate lead. So the geology around McRae's doesn't suggest that there is lead. We don't use lead in our reagents to extract the gold. So there's no significant sources of lead at McRae's, and the water quality over the last 70 years provides evidence of that.
I just ask you to be patient. I will try to get to everybody in due course.
Hi, Caleb Frew. I live in Waikouaiti. I have a couple of questions. One, is there any plan to test the eggs coming out of the egg farm? It's one of the biggest industries that we have in Waikouaiti, so is there any plan to go over that?
Okay, I'm a human health person, so we will have to take that away and find out unless somebody else on the panel here knows the answer to that. It's one of those questions that we'll take away and we'll find out the information for you.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, and I know none of you are vets, are there any animals that are more susceptible or less susceptible to lead poisoning, and as a pet owner, do I need to be aware of that?
Okay, unless there is a vet present, that will have to be another question that we take away and get the information for you.
Hi, Marilyn Kendall.
Just a couple of seconds. As I said earlier on, Sonia is taking notes of all these questions, and the gentleman's last two questions about mainland poultry there's nobody here qualified to answer that. We will find out the answers for you and we will let you know. It might take a week or so. Yes, madam.
Hi, my name's Wendy. I'm a local here at Waikouaiti. I work in the animal health sector. I'm not a vet, but since this is broken, as you can imagine, I've had numerous phone calls at my work. I have got advisement from my vets from further afield who were concerned to start off with, but they've done some calculations for the livestock in this area, and I've been assured that the levels are okay for livestock, meaning sheep, cattle, but we are advising all our pet owners to use the tank water. If you're not willing to drink it yourself, don't feed it to cat and dog. Simple as.
And I'd like to follow that up too. I mean, if you're feeling uncomfortable at all about any animal that's drinking the water, we do have the tankers there. And if we need to bring more tankers out to feed those animals, then we'll have to do that. We don't want anybody doing something they don't want to do.
Hello, Marilyn Kendall from Waikouaiti. Just back to the gardening issue. My garden would take on many more litres of water than what I would. So where is the relativity to the human testing in relation to the soil?
We have heard that you are very concerned about gardening and vegetables, rightly so. We are not experts in that area, so I think that is something that we will have to take away too and check with those who know more about the absorption of lead from water in plants.
It's not the absorption really, it's what it does to the soil, because that soil is hot when that water hits the ground, and you've told us not to boil our water because it increases the concentration of the lead. So we can't grow things, it doesn't matter if they take it up or not, we can't grow things in soil that has lead in it.
So I've just checked, I'm not aware that anyone has knowledge here on soil. Is that, so we'll have to take that question and those sort of questions away. I'll pass it on.
The other question, particularly for children, is that they love digging soil, okay? So if you've got an accumulation of lead in your soil, it can be inhaled as dust, and that's the danger. So aside from the issue with vegetables, we need to look at levels in our soil if the blood levels are over the acceptable rate, Because you've got children mucking around in soil, you've also got animals that love rolling in dusty soil, you're going to give that animal a cuddle and inhale that dust. So that needs to be talked about. Thank you.
That's a very valid point on the soil lead levels from the water. We don't know though what we've done, but I was thinking to Ms. Cox, who spoke before, where she's actually taken some soil away and knows its original lead level. That would be an interesting garden to have a look at. Do you use tap water for watering your plants? Because I hear what you're saying, and I do think that we need to take it, well, we will take it seriously. We'll have to, don't ask us to design the experiment tonight at the table, but I have to figure out what we want to do in order to get a good answer of that, because it's absolutely essential that we measure wherever we can, we do anything we can to get an understanding of what is going on, because we are there's a vacuum of knowledge here, and I'm not going to say it's all wonderful and let's go home and not think about it, because that's inappropriate. At the same extent, I think it's also, we don't have any evidence to say where we are anywhere on that spectrum at the moment. If we know that we've got somebody who's already measured their lead levels at some other time in the history of their ownership of that soil, then if we retested that soil again, we'd be able to know what's happened in the interim with the water from the town that's been provided to it during that period. And I think that would help us a lot to know whether or not there's been accumulation or not.
I'm Eileen from Waikouaiti. I've been a beekeeper for 45 years. I think lead is just one issue. We send our honey to Japan. They've now rejected it because the levels of Roundup in our honey is too high. So I think testing for soils and water has to even go beyond lead for our safety if our honey has got these things in it.
Hi. One thing that caught my attention at the beginning is that there's also a spike in the other positive ion heavy metals. Now, I'm aware that fluoride in the water comes from a Category 8 industrial waste poison called hexafluoric acid. It's a nasty raw ingredient. Now, fluorine has a negative ion, and these metals are positive. Has the fluoride spiked in the water as well? Is there a correlation between the putting of hexafluoric acid in the water for fluoride and this lead? Because lead's a positive ion.
So I don't know if we've looked at that correlation yet, but I'll pass that on to the team and we will look at it.
Hello, I've just got 3 points. One is there's been no mention of Hawkesbury. They're feeling a bit lonely, so it's also been impacted. What was the other one? No, there's your one. Sorry. And the other thing is, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a hell of a lot of scientists in the room, which tells you a lot about the people out there. There's a huge amount of information in this room. And the third thing is, if I understand it correctly, lead competes with iron and calcium. Is there any benefit to extra supplementation of iron and calcium to counteract any potential lead in the body?
So there can be if there are nutritional deficiencies, and so in other settings, particularly in settings in developing nations where there are occasionally large outbreaks of heavily lead contaminated soil or other issues where children are being affected, particularly children that have poor nutritional status, that can be a part of the therapy to maximize the stores of calcium or iron or other things in the body to help decrease the sort of impact that lead might have as far as the absorption. So it can be, it's not necessarily, if someone has a good nutritional status, not something that is necessarily going to make a huge impact on the lead that is present in the body. It's more about mitigating potential absorption. But the biggest influence on mitigating potential absorption is minimizing the exposure.
Hi, so it doesn't matter who I am. Just a couple of questions though. Washing of dishes, obviously you have to heat the water.
Are we to be boiling the water from the tankers on our stoves, or is it safe to use hot water to wash the dishes or dishwashers? And my second question is, the testing, why does it have to wait till Tuesday? We're here now, we're here all weekend worrying, so why can't it start tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks. Two good questions. So yes, it's fine for you to wash your dishes either with hot water or boiled water or in your dishwashers. Let them dry, obviously, and the lead is not going to be adherent to the plates or anything like that, so that's safe. Why are we waiting until Tuesday? It's quite a logistical feat to organise blood testing for your community is around 1,500 people. We needed to have time to prepare, to get everything lined up. We also considered that over the next few days it will not make any difference to your blood lead level. It's not one of those acute situations where if we took it today you're going to have a different result to if we take it on Tuesday. It will have no material difference in your result. So we felt that it was better to be extremely well prepared, have our team ready, have the people skilled in being able to take blood off children, for example, and that has just taken some time to organise. So we have been working tirelessly this week to prepare and to get things ready. We only decided to do the blood testing a couple of days ago, and so we've been working ever since then. So we do ask you for your patience and thank you for coming out tonight and your contributions and for asking your questions. We are wanting to work with you as much as we can so that we can help get those answers, and we're as eager as you are to know what those results are. We just need to do it in a way that we're not taking any shortcuts, and so that when we get the results we can interpret them properly.
Hello, my question is to you, Dr. Adam. I note that we are really concentrating on the lead here, but you did mention that we have high copper, zinc and iron also as heavy metals that you have detected in the water system. Do we need to have these tested as well?
So from a health risk standpoint, I don't think that those are going to be as high of a concern as lead, because lead has such a known relationship between even low levels and potentially having some consequences and risk. With copper, any metal in a sufficiently high dose can cause problems, right? But we take supplements, iron supplements, ferrous sulfate supplements that are 300 milligram tablets that are taken, on a daily basis. And our bodies also have ways to handle and eliminate those other metals much more quickly than lead. They're not accumulative in the same way as lead. So they're not going to be as acute health concern as the lead is in this situation. Any other comments about the lead or the levels? Because I can't speak to those.
So the copper and other metal results that we have are well below the drinking water standards. It was only lead that we had 6 results that exceeded the guidelines.
You're not looking like that, so it makes you feel better. But I mean, the reality was that those numbers were low, and the way that those ions are handled by your body is different. And so when you look at the two combinations together, it's not really
Will they be tested in the future along with the lead?
In the water testing that we're doing? Yes. And we've increased the panel all out to the full panel, so that we're looking at everything. And
So what are you going to be testing in the future in our water? What are the heavy metals and what else are you testing?
I don't
Can you
have the
answer
panel in front of me.
I don't know off the top of my head. It's 25 plus contaminants.
Well, I think the whole of the community would be very interested.
Yeah, we can make that information
and we would like it public as to what you test and what the results are.
Yeah, great.
Hi, I'd just like to ask, have you asked the Otago University for any info on the river? Because along with the Runaka and other agencies, they've been doing tests in that river for many, many years. Surely if there was any lead or anything else, they would have picked it up, because they pick up everything else that's to stop us from doing other things. So surely you think they'd find some lead.
I know that my daughter has done that undergraduate course. I'll go and ask the professors that organise it what they're measuring on the river when they do that.
Just on that too, you're absolutely right, there's a number of data sources available and very good ones. So when we talk about a broader monitoring program of the river to see if there's an underlying issue, we said lead's not normally monitored, but it doesn't mean it hasn't been for some form or some project. So science teams' connections to the university or to other study groups that may have worked in the Waikouaiti River or the local Runaka, absolutely. We can make those connections and see if there's any data that can be put into the system as well.
Hi, I'm Grant Vickers from Waikouaiti. We're all here tonight because we're very concerned about lead in our water. And you've come up with some plans and some solutions and some information, which is all good. But I can't help thinking that it's putting sticking plaster on the problem. The water supply in Waikouaiti is shit. You've made the comment, Councillor O'Malley, that there's a pipe to Secret, but we can't afford it. To me, this highlights probably the biggest elephant in the room for me. I think the council have lost their way. We're pissing around spending money on spots on the street and stars on dams, and the infrastructure is falling to bits around us.
I hear you, but to hear you, we need to get people to say that in a way that it's recorded, and so that consulting on the 10-year plan, how we spend our big budgets, is starting in about a month's time. And what I encourage everybody in this town to do is to put in those submissions, because they weren't there in the last 3 year submission.
But Jim, you don't listen to us.
I'm hearing you right now, and I've heard you, so therefore I will be raising this every time we talk about this from now on. And to some extent now we probably don't need to have the submissions for the 10-year plan, because I think it's pretty loud and clear. But the community board, it's got to get on the community board plan in a much more active form, and other places, so that all the methods by which the council understands what the community is asking for are hit, so we actually hear it, put it into our plans. I'll give you my promise that by the time we get to the consultation document in May, we'll have got back to you as to how we're dealing with it. But we do need to hear what you want, because it won't come for free. So what's the other component?
But my point is, Jim, maybe the council have lost their way and they're not spending in the way that the community wants.
Well, currently over 50% of the spend is in Three Waters. And do you believe that? We'll go and have a look at the documents that are coming out in the 10-year plan. Next year we're proposing $36 million in Three Waters. We're going up to $58 million a year in Three Waters by the end of that 10-year plan. And we can't go any higher per year, because we can't actually there's not a big enough civil construction workforce in the city to meet the Three Waters extra spend that we've put in. Compare that to only $10 million a year only 5 years ago. We are really ramping up massively on our Three Water spend. And I have raised it in the past that this is the last town on the northern part of the Northern Water Scheme that is not connected to Mount Grant. And so maybe it's time to us consider to do that.
I'd just like to add a wee bit to that. It was a number of years ago when we had the Northern Water Scheme installed. Prior to that, Waitati and Warrington had their own schemes. And there was an awful lot of debate about the whole Northern Water Scheme thing. And the pipe was sized to come as far as Seacliff with a certain margin for expansion of population. At this stage, you can't just glue a piece of pipe onto the end of the existing one and feed the whole of the town. It will need more capacity, and that we will look at. The other option, of course, is to upgrade what you have, your water treatment plant. But no matter what we have, the line from town or the upgrade here, your actual pipes, your infrastructure here are not good. They are in the process of upgrading. When we come back for our next meeting, we'll give you a timeline on that, because we as a community board are singularly unhappy with this as well.
What about the pipe work you did a couple of years ago through our town?
They haven't done them all. That was part of the ones. The worst ones were done first, and there's still more to be done. Yeah, there are more to be done, and they're on a plan. And just, what was it, the weekend before last, there were 2 breaks on the pipe to Karatani. One popped its clogs, I think, on a Friday. It was repaired on a Saturday, and on the Sunday the pipe burst further away. There is now pipe getting renewed in there. So they know that the pipes around here are not good. The whole thing is in a sorry state, and the options are the big town option or fix up the treatment plant here, but the pipes have got to be fixed regardless.
So in other words, you're just putting a sticking plaster?
No, it's not. Putting new pipes in is not a sticking plaster. It has to be done anyway.
You know, I'm just saying, you fix one and
Absolutely. You can only do one bit at a time. Right, so that's what they're doing. And by the time you come along here in a couple of weeks, we'll tell you more. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name's Norm Scott from the bottom end of Beach Street. I'd like to bring the meeting back to the question of health of our individuals here in Waikouaiti and Karatani. On the second page at the top there, it talks about the effects of lead poisoning. Last week, I collapsed and had to be taken to hospital by ambulance. I underwent blood tests, body moisture tests, etc., vomiting. You could go down all the list of the effects you can get from lead poisoning, and you could have ticked every box as far as I was concerned. I was under 3 surgeons and a lot of staff, a lot of testing, even had a CT scan. And at the end of the time I was there, they said, we do not know what caused this. But all those boxes were ticked from the effects of lead poisoning. My wife was talking to a lady today, and her husband last week happened the same thing, exactly the same conditions, same symptoms, and same result. They didn't know what caused it. This definitely wasn't food poisoning or on that line. There's been a lot of talk lately with people who've been friends of ours. There's been concern about their health, the different things that you suffer from. One of the ones many of them are worried about is headaches, tiredness, memory impairment. A lot of them thought they were getting Alzheimer's. When you have your blood tests done, are you taking any questionnaires from people to try and judge some of the health issues that they've had in the last 6 months? Because I think you'll find, you'll be surprised how many people have suffered from these matters.
Thank you for that. So yes, we do have a questionnaire, a short questionnaire we'll be asking you to all fill in. We're not actually asking for your health history of the last few months. We are asking about your possible exposures to lead. If you return a result that is high, then we will definitely be going back to ask everybody's detailed medical history. So at that point, that information will be shared with the Public Health Unit and with your general practitioner. But for the survey, it will be looking at your risk of exposure, not the health issues that you may have had.
What are you using for baseline?
Sorry?
What are you using for
Hang on. Can't hear you. Just a moment.
What's the baseline?
Thank you. So, like Dr. Pomelo has explained, we will be going back and looking at research that's been done in New Zealand, and that is probably the best study that we've got to get an idea of what we expect the levels will be. And then we'll be looking at other sources from other countries as well. So we'll be working with Environmental Science and Research Institute to undertake that analysis and do those comparisons, so that when we have our next meeting, we can give you as much information as we can.
I would have thought, after the concerns of health of people in these 2 townships, why has the Department of Health
not come out to the choir and talk to the people. It's the only way you're going to learn these things is not from textbooks, but going out and talking to the people.
Yeah, so that's exactly why we've called this meeting, and we're really grateful that you've all come out, and I hope that you're finding this a valuable discussion. We have a small team, and we've been working flat out to do everything that's culminated in this meeting tonight, and that we'll be doing the testing. So that's the reason, and that's the reason why we called the meeting, so that we could have everybody in one room and we could all listen and hear from each other. So we do want to thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you. Mandy's got some questions that other people who can't get here tonight have asked her to ask, so we'll just get her the mic.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think you've touched on most of the things, but one really important one that I think we're overlooking, there's a lot of mums who aren't here this evening. I really want to ask about the well-being of our tamariki, and I especially am asking on behalf of all the pregnant mums. I want to know, will there be any additional protocols in place for our pregnant mothers now and after they give birth, for the testing of their babies, for the testing of their toddlers? I know we don't have any blood test results back yet, but I need to know they are our vulnerable. Those mums and those tamariki, I need to know that you're going to do some follow-up to make sure our kids are okay. Please.
Okay, thank you for that. So this will be a step-by-step process. We initially need to see what the levels are, and then, as we've indicated, if they are higher than we expect, then we will need to work with you to have a follow-up plan.
Okay, kia ora, my name's Mark Lindsay. I'm a Karatani resident. I'm a father of a 2-year-old. More worried about her than me. I had a couple of questions, most of which have been answered. Thank you. I did want to say thank you guys so much for stepping up in front of us and answering our questions. That's really appreciated. Thank you. So yeah, I did have questions about vegetables and about children and lead, most of which have been answered. I did want to know, once the testing has been done, if there is lead present, will our water tanks in Karatani, which do have, obviously, the spikes are going to leave lead in regardless of spiking, will you guys be coming in and helping us clean them out and then refilling them, because we are on drip feeds? It takes a long time to fill up our water tanks once they're emptied. So that was one question that I had. And two, as a keen veggie gardener and with a dependent wife and small child, as a early childhood teacher on a shit salary, is there any way I can get my tank emptied and then refilled so I can put it in my garden before my veggies die? You know, are any of these things possible? I think that's about it.
So we're working through a range of options to support the community. I know local businesses which I bring in 1 cubic metre containers so they can hook up coffee makers. So we are open to these kind of discussions with the community and working through this in the best way we can with you. So encourage you to call CSA 4774,000 and we'll do the best we can to support the community.
How about also, I don't think it really wouldn't be practical to sample all of the tanks in the town, but if we came and sampled, say, 10, and then looked and see how those look compared to the mains, would have an understanding then of what's happening, because you know full well if I turn your restrictor off, the tank can get empty within a few days. So there is movement through your tank, and this is soluble lead, which means that stuff has moved through. If that last spike was the last spike, then it's all moved through. But we don't know enough to say that it's safe to drink. And we therefore are cautious about watering your vegetables. But it's sort of a step down each time in the level of danger or protection of safety that we're talking. In terms of understanding the tanks, I don't think it would be a bad thing if we went and took some samples from some tanks, and that way we'd have a look at them and we'd be able to compare them to what the water main samples were for that time. Would that help? Would that? Well, I mean, the fact is, it would be my belief that your tank will look like the water main levels within about 3 days of it. So if it had a spike within 3 or 4 days, it will have been gone out of your tank as well. This is not solid lead that's building up in your tank. It's soluble lead. No, it's like salt water. If you got salt water in, if you keep flushing, it'll go on out the other side. It's soluble lead, not solid lead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Helena. I work in the community with elderly people and people with ill health. 3 questions. Can you please make sure there will be a sign at the entrance of Hawkesbury, the old cherry farm? There is no sign, and some of the clients have bad short memory, so they can't tell me if the water is okay or not, and they probably might not remember themselves. So that's an extra complication. Also, can you please tell me if you can promise to also do the blood testing in Karitani, because elderly people, even if they get transport to Waikouaiti, it's still very complicated, some can hardly walk. So if you can just set up some testing in the Karitani, maybe the school, the old school, the marae, or somewhere nearby, that would be much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the feedback, and we can certainly consider if we can move one of our teams to Karitane. I'm not 100% promising that, but we certainly will look at if that is going to be feasible and possible for us to do.
G'day, I'm Judy from Waikouaiti. I'm just wanting to know if people have already had blood tests, then do they still need to come and fill out a questionnaire if they've got health concerns that they've been able to tick boxes, that's what I was saying.
So can they also fill out the questionnaire? Is that what you're asking?
Oh,
yeah. So I will be contacting East Otago Medical Centre, and if other people have had have GPs in other places, maybe we can have a list at the front, and then we can make sure that we can get a questionnaire to you, because yes, we would really like that filled in by everybody who's had a blood test. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Julie. I'm from Waikouaiti. It has come to my attention that we were going to have a community gardens in Kildare Street next to the church, and for some reason there was soil contamination there, and so it might be a good point to start, because we didn't have our community gardens there in the end because the soil was toxic. So if you can get your hands on that information, what toxicity was in that soil, and that was last year or the year before even. I'm pretty sure there's some people here in this room that know about that. Would that be useful?
The issue is it hasn't been watered since. It hasn't been watered since we abandoned the idea. Yeah, but you got the results from when we are
Hi, hello, we've got to the stage now, but it's about coming up to 9:30. Half the audience have left, and so we're not going to be in a position to hear the answers to any further questions that come along. As we said before, there will be another meeting like this, and we will advertise it widely, and we would like to see you all here again. We really want to say thank you to you for coming, because we've got a huge amount of information. These people here have got a lot of homework to do over the next couple of weeks. A lot of questions have been asked where we don't know the answers. And that's understandable, since this hasn't happened before. I want to say a huge thank you to Bridie up there, who stayed an hour past what she was normally going to do. I want to say a big, big thank you to these people who have come along tonight, taking the time, Andrew and his team. No, do you think I've lost the plot or something? No, the whole lot of them. Give them a big hand. It's been great. I want to thank Sonia for all that she's been doing. There's a huge amount of work she's done, noting all this down, and there's an awful lot of work to do to follow this through. And she didn't know I was going to offer her services to help elderly people from Karatani to come for the blood tests next week. But we'll find a way of doing that. We don't want anybody not being able to come. I've noted that we've got 6 of the city councillors here tonight, including the mayor, out of the 15 that we have who make it, sorry, we've got 7 council, almost half of them. These are the people that make the funding decisions. They've heard everything that you said tonight, and when we as a community board put forward your requests in our 10-year plan, they will most assuredly listen, because they're not just hearing from us, they're hearing from you. So we've got a lot of work to do as well. We want to hear more from you the next time you come along. We're going to endeavour to answer every question that we couldn't answer tonight, and we will have all that for you when you come back next time. Really want to thank you all for coming along. It's been a long night, and I know you're not happy, and you're still not happy. Neither am I. It is what it is at the moment. We're doing our best. These guys are doing their best. And we are going to make sure we get a decent outcome for you. I don't know how long it'll take, I don't know what it'll be, but you can rest assured that we're going to do the very best we can to make it happen. And I'm sorry, some of you haven't had a chance to ask questions, but we'll certainly take your questions next time we're here, because I think we've just about covered off every topic that there is. So thank you once again for coming along. Thank you, the people, for being here. Good night.